The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small outpost in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez limped slowly along the dusty road, her left leg dragging slightly behind her. The improvised explosive device had torn through her patrol vehicle 3 days ago, leaving her with shrapnel wounds and a deep gash that ran from her knee to her ankle. Despite the pain medication, every step sent waves of agony through her body. Maria had been walking for over an hour, trying to reach the forward operating base where she could get proper medical attention. Her radio had been damaged in the blast and her team had been evacuated to different locations. She was alone, carrying only her rifle and a small medical kit that was nearly empty. The road ahead shimmered in the heat, creating mirages that made her question what was real and what wasn't. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, and the bandage on her leg had turned a dark red color. She knew she was losing blood, but stopping wasn't an option. The Taliban controlled this area, and staying in one place too long would mean certain death. As she rounded a bend in the road, Maria spotted movement ahead. Through the haze, she could make out several figures positioned behind rocks and abandoned vehicles. Her heart raced as she realized it was an American Special Operations team. Relief flooded through her body as she recognized the distinctive gear and weapons of Navy SEALs. The team consisted of 6 highly trained operators led by Chief Petty Officer Jake Thompson, a veteran with over a decade of combat experience. They had been conducting reconnaissance on a high-value target in the area when they spotted the lone figure approaching their position. Through their scopes, they could see someone in military fatigues, but the distance and heat distortion made it difficult to identify friend or foe. "Contact ahead," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Mike Chen into his radio. "Single individual, approximately 200 meters, moving slowly on the main road." Thompson adjusted his scope and studied the approaching figure. The person appeared to be limping and moving erratically. In this hostile territory, anyone could be a threat. Insurgents often used wounded civilians or even captured soldiers as bait to lure American forces into ambushes. "Could be a setup," muttered Petty Officer First Class David Williams, the team's demolitions expert. "We've seen this before. They send someone who looks injured to get us to expose our position." The team had been operating in the region for 2 weeks, and they had already encountered several attempted ambushes. Just the day before, they had barely escaped a complex attack that had been initiated by what appeared to be a wounded Afghan civilian who had approached their patrol seeking help. Thompson made a quick decision based on their current mission, parameters, and the potential threat. "We maintain position and observe. If this individual gets too close to our operational area, we'll have to take defensive action." Maria continued her painful journey, unaware that she was being watched through high-powered scopes. The medication was wearing off and the pain in her leg was becoming unbearable. She paused to rest against a large boulder, taking deep breaths and trying to gather her strength for the final push to safety. From her position, she could see what looked like a military checkpoint ahead. Hope surged through her as she convinced herself that rescue was finally within reach. She had no idea that the SEALs were debating whether she posed a threat to their covert operation. "Movement has stopped," reported Chen. "Individual appears to be resting behind cover." This behavior only increased the team's suspicion. In their experience, genuine casualties typically continued moving toward help, unless they were physically unable to do so. The fact that this person had stopped behind cover suggested possible hostile intent. Williams shifted his position to get a better angle. "Chief, we need to make a call here. Our extraction is scheduled in 30 minutes and we can't afford to compromise the mission." The SEAL team had spent days gathering critical intelligence on a terrorist cell operating in the area. Their successful completion of this mission could save countless American lives and disrupt enemy operations throughout the region. Thompson weighed the potential risk of allowing an unknown individual to approach their position against the possibility that this might be a fellow service member in need of help. "Rules of engagement are clear," Thompson said quietly. "We cannot allow potential hostiles to compromise our position or our mission." Maria forced herself to stand up again, gritting her teeth against the pain. She had to keep moving. Every instinct told her that safety was just ahead and she couldn't give up now. Her fellow soldiers were counting on her to survive and complete her mission. As she stepped out from behind the boulder and began walking again, the SEAL team tensed. Through their scopes, they could see the figure more clearly now, but the heat distortion and distance still made positive identification impossible. "Target is mobile again," Chen reported. Closing distance to our position, Thompson's finger moved to his trigger as he tracked the approaching figure. In the special operations community, split-second decisions often meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. He had to protect his team and their critical intelligence at all costs. The weight of command pressed heavily on Thompson's shoulders as he watched the limping figure continue toward their position. Every training scenario had prepared him for this moment, but the reality of potentially engaging an unknown target felt different than any simulation he had ever experienced. Maria was now less than 100 meters away from the hidden SEAL position. She could see military equipment and what appeared to be American uniforms through the rocks ahead. Her heart filled with relief as she prepared to call out to her fellow service members. She had no way of knowing that those same service members were preparing to engage what they believed to be a potential threat to their mission and their lives. The tension in the air was thick as Maria continued her painful approach toward what she believed was salvation. Her vision had started to blur from blood loss and dehydration, but she forced herself to focus on the military equipment she could see ahead. The distinctive shape of American tactical gear gave her hope that her ordeal was finally coming to an end. Thompson's team remained perfectly still, their weapons trained on the approaching figure. Years of combat experience had taught them that survival often depended on making hard decisions quickly. In this unforgiving landscape, hesitation could mean death for the entire team. "Chief, I'm getting a better look now," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Lisa Park, the team's sniper. She had positioned herself on higher ground and had the clearest view of the approaching individual. "Definitely military gear, but I can't make out any unit patches or identification from this distance." The challenge of identifying friend from foe in modern warfare had become increasingly complex. Insurgents often wore captured American uniforms and carried stolen equipment to blend in or create confusion during attacks. The SEAL team had encountered this tactic multiple times during their deployment. Maria stopped again, this time leaning heavily against a damaged concrete barrier. The wound on her leg had reopened and fresh blood was seeping through the bandage. She reached for her medical kit, hoping to find something to stop the bleeding, but her hands were shaking too badly to open the clasp. "Target has stopped again and appears to be accessing some kind of equipment," reported Chen. "Could be preparing weapons or communication devices." This observation heightened the team's alert level. In their operational environment, anyone reaching for equipment could be preparing to detonate an explosive device or signal for backup. Thompson had seen too many good soldiers killed by underestimating potential threats. Williams adjusted his scope and studied the figure's movements carefully. "The way this person is moving doesn't seem right. Chief, could be trying to appear wounded to get close to our position." The psychological pressure of making life and death decisions weighed heavily on each team member. They had trained extensively for scenarios exactly like this one, but the reality of potentially engaging an unknown target created stress that no simulation could replicate. Maria managed to pull a fresh bandage from her kit and began wrapping it around her leg. The simple task required enormous effort, and she had to pause several times to fight off waves of dizziness. She had no idea that her every movement was being interpreted as potentially hostile by the hidden observers. "Movement suggests possible medical treatment," Park observed, "but could also be concealing weapons or explosives under medical supplies." Thompson made a quick assessment of their tactical situation. His team was well concealed and had excellent fields of fire, but their extraction helicopter would arrive soon. Any delay or compromise of their position could jeopardize not only their mission, but also the safety of the aircrew coming to retrieve them. The radio crackled quietly in Thompson's ear. "Falcon 6, this is Eagle Base. Extraction bird is wheels up and en route to your position. ETA 15 minutes. The timeline was getting tighter. Thompson had to make a decision that would affect everyone involved. He looked at each of his team members, seeing the same concern reflected in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. Maria finished bandaging her wound and slowly stood up again. The fresh bandage helped reduce the bleeding, but she could feel her strength continuing to fade. She estimated that she was no more than 50 meters from the position ahead, and she could now clearly see American equipment and uniforms. "Hey," she called out weakly, her voice barely carrying in the desert air. "American soldier." I need help. The sound of English being spoken surprised the SEAL team, but they had been warned that insurgents sometimes used captured American personnel or English-speaking fighters to create confusion. Thompson held up his hand, signaling his team to remain ready but hold their fire. Did everyone hear that? Thompson whispered into his radio. Affirmative, Chief, came the replies from his team members. Could be legitimate or could be a trap, Williams responded. We've seen them use captured personnel before. Maria began walking again, moving as quickly as her injured leg would allow. She could see figures moving behind the rocks ahead, and she was certain they had seen her. Relief flooded through her as she anticipated finally reaching safety and getting the medical attention she desperately needed. Target is approaching rapidly now, Chen reported. Distance approximately 30 meters and closing. The SEAL team's rules of engagement were clear about defending their position against potential threats, but they also included provisions for assisting American personnel in distress. Thompson faced an impossible decision with incomplete information and time running out. Park maintained her scope picture on the approaching figure. Chief, I'm starting to make out more details. Appears to be wearing ACU pattern uniform, but still can't confirm unit identification or see any visible weapons. The advanced combat uniform pattern was standard issue for American forces, but insurgents had been known to acquire and use captured uniforms. The SEAL team couldn't rely on uniform appearance alone to make their identification. Maria was now close enough to see the faces of the soldiers ahead. She raised her hand and waved, trying to get their attention. Please, I'm injured. American soldier! Her voice was stronger this time, and the desperation was clearly audible. Thompson felt his finger tense on his trigger as he struggled with the decision that could determine whether an American service member lived or died. Chief, we need to make the call now, Williams urged. If this is a setup, we're already too close for comfort. The helicopter extraction was only minutes away, and any compromise of their position could result in casualties among both his team and the aircrew. Thompson had to weigh the life of one potentially friendly individual against the lives of his entire team and their critical mission. Through his scope, Thompson could now see more details of the approaching figure. The person was definitely injured and moving with obvious difficulty, but in this environment appearances could be deceiving, and the cost of being wrong was too high to ignore. The critical moment had arrived. Thompson's training and experience told him to eliminate the potential threat, but something deep in his gut suggested this might be a terrible mistake. The approaching figure was now only 20 meters away, close enough that any explosive device could cause serious damage to his team. All positions. Prepare to engage on my command, Thompson whispered into his radio. His finger moved to the trigger and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did in this moment. Maria could see the soldiers clearly now, and she was confused by their positioning. They appeared to be aiming weapons in her direction rather than preparing to help her. Fear began to mix with her relief as she realized something was terribly wrong with the situation. Don't shoot. I'm American, she called out desperately, raising both hands above her head despite the pain it caused in her wounded leg. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, 82nd Airborne Division. The identification caused Thompson to hesitate. The 82nd Airborne was a legitimate American unit and the name sounded authentic. But insurgents had access to captured personnel records and could easily have obtained such information to use in deception operations. Could be real intel, or could be compromised information, Chen whispered. We've seen them use captured ID information before. Park maintained her scope on the target while scanning the surrounding area for additional threats. No signs of backup or supporting elements, Chief. If this is a setup, they're either very confident or very desperate. The approaching figure continued moving toward their position with obvious difficulty. The limp appeared genuine, and the bloodstains on the uniform looked real. But Thompson had seen insurgents go to extraordinary lengths to create convincing deceptions. Williams shifted his position to get a better angle on potential escape routes. Chief, Extraction Bird will be here in 8 minutes. We need to clear this situation before they arrive. The helicopter would be extremely vulnerable during landing, and any hostile forces in the area could easily target the aircraft during the extraction process. Thompson couldn't allow anything to compromise the safety of the aircrew or the success of their critical mission. Maria was now close enough to see the uncertainty in the soldiers' eyes. She could tell they were debating whether to trust her, and the realization filled her with terror. After surviving the IED blast and walking through hostile territory for hours, she might be killed by her own side. "Please listen to me," she said, her voice breaking with exhaustion and fear. "I was injured in an IED blast 3 days ago. My patrol was hit near checkpoint Delta 7. I've been trying to reach friendly forces ever since." The specific reference to checkpoint Delta 7 caught Thompson's attention. That was a real location that had been the site of several recent attacks, and the timing matched intelligence reports they had received about insurgent activity in the area. "Park, can you see any visible wounds or injuries?" Thompson asked quietly. "Affirmative, Chief. I can see blood on the left leg and what appears to be field dressing. Individual is definitely favoring that leg and appears to be in genuine distress." The evidence was mounting that this might actually be a legitimate American casualty, but Thompson couldn't ignore the possibility that this was an elaborate deception. The stakes were too high to make the wrong choice. Maria took another step closer, and her injured leg finally gave out completely. She collapsed to the ground with a cry of pain, clutching her wounded limb as fresh blood began seeping through the bandage. "Target is down," Park reported. "Appears to be a genuine medical emergency." The collapse looked authentic and the visible pain seemed real, but Thompson had seen skilled actors create convincing performances before. His training told him that insurgents would go to any length to get close to American forces, including inflicting real injuries on themselves or their operatives. "Chief, we've got movement on the ridgeline to the east," Chen suddenly reported. "Possible additional contacts." This new development changed everything. If there were other people in the area, it could confirm that this was indeed a setup designed to draw the SEAL team into an ambush. Thompson's finger tightened on his trigger as he prepared to engage multiple targets. Maria heard the radio chatter and saw the soldiers' attention shift to something behind her. She turned her head and spotted movement on the distant ridge. Her heart sank as she realized that Taliban fighters had probably been tracking her, and her approach to the American position had led them directly to both forces. "There are insurgents following me," she gasped, trying to make her voice carry to the hidden soldiers. "I think they've been tracking me since the blast. You need to get out of here before they surround you." This revelation created a new dilemma for Thompson. If the injured soldier was legitimate and insurgents were approaching, his team had a duty to protect a fellow service member. But if this was all part of an elaborate trap, engaging the distant contacts could expose his team to the primary threat that was now only 15 meters away. "Park, maintain eyes on our immediate contact. Chen and Williams shift to cover the eastern approach. We've got multiple problems developing simultaneously." The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. Thompson had to protect his team, potentially assist a wounded American, and prepare for possible engagement with insurgent forces, all while ensuring they were ready for helicopter extraction in just a few minutes. Maria tried to stand up again but couldn't put any weight on her injured leg. The collapse had reopened her wounds and she was losing blood at an alarming rate. She could see the American soldiers were still pointing weapons at her while also watching for other threats. "I know this looks bad," she said weakly, "but I'm not your enemy. I've been fighting the same people you're fighting. Please don't let me die here when I'm so close to safety." The emotion in her voice seemed genuine, and Thompson found himself wanting to believe her story. But his responsibility to his team and their mission had to take priority over any individual. Even if that person was a fellow American soldier, the sound of approaching helicopter rotors could be heard in the distance. Their extraction was imminent, and Thompson had to make a final decision about how to handle this rapidly evolving situation. Every second of delay increased the risk to everyone involved. The helicopter's distant rotor sound grew louder, and Thompson knew he had less than 3 minutes to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The tactical situation had become a nightmare scenario with multiple variables and no clear right answer. "Chief, I count at least 4 individuals moving down the eastern ridge," Chen reported. "They're carrying weapons and moving with purpose toward our position." The approaching insurgents confirmed that this situation was about to become a firefight. Regardless of what Thompson decided about the injured soldier, his team would have to engage hostile forces while managing the complication of a potential friendly casualty in their immediate area. Maria could hear the helicopter approaching and felt a surge of hope, but she could also see the insurgents getting closer. She had led these fighters directly to the American position, and now everyone was in danger because of her desperate attempt to reach safety. "You have to leave me," she called out to the hidden soldiers. "Take your helicopter and get out of here. Don't let them kill you because of me." Her willingness to sacrifice herself for the safety of others struck Thompson as genuine. Insurgents typically wouldn't encourage American forces to escape, and they certainly wouldn't suggest abandoning a potential hostage or target. Williams had shifted his position to cover the eastern approach and now had a clear view of the advancing insurgents. "Chief, hostile forces are approximately 300 meters out and closing fast. We need to engage or extract immediately. The timing couldn't have been worse. The extraction helicopter would be most vulnerable during landing, and insurgent forces were closing on their position with a potentially compromised friendly soldier caught in the middle of the developing firefight park." Maintained her scope on Maria while splitting her attention between the injured soldier and the approaching threats. "Chief, the injured individual is losing a lot of blood. If she's legitimate, she needs immediate medical attention." Thompson made a command decision that went against his training but followed his instincts. "Park Chen, maintain overwatch on the eastern approach. Williams, you're with me. We're going to retrieve the soldier and get her to the extraction point." The decision surprised his team, but they immediately adjusted their positions to provide cover. Thompson had built trust with these operators over years of combat, and they would follow his lead even when they disagreed with his choices. "Copy that, Chief," Williams responded, moving to provide close protection as Thompson began advancing toward Maria's position. Maria saw two of the soldiers emerging from cover and moving toward her. Relief flooded through her body as she realized they had decided to help her, rather than treat her as a threat. But she could also see the insurgents getting closer, and knew that this rescue attempt was putting everyone at risk. Thompson approached carefully, his weapon ready but not directly aimed at Maria. His training told him to maintain caution, but his gut instinct suggested this was a legitimate American casualty who needed immediate help. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he called out as he got closer. "I'm Chief Thompson, Navy SEALs. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly." The relief in Maria's eyes was unmistakable as she heard her rank and name spoken by an American voice. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was going to die out here." Williams reached her position first and immediately began assessing her injuries. His medical training told him that she had lost significant blood and was going into shock. The wounds appeared genuine, and her physical condition supported her story about being injured in an IED blast. "Chief, these injuries are real," Williams confirmed. "She needs immediate medical evacuation or she's not going to make it." Thompson felt a wave of relief mixed with guilt as he realized they had almost killed a fellow American soldier. But there was no time to process those emotions with hostile forces approaching and a helicopter landing in less than 2 minutes. "Contact east. 200 meters. Park's voice crackled through their radios. "Multiple insurgents moving toward our position with weapons visible." The firefight was about to begin, and Thompson's team was now committed to protecting and evacuating Maria, regardless of the increased risk to their own safety. Williams began applying emergency medical treatment while Thompson coordinated with the incoming helicopter. "Eagle Base, this is Falcon 6, Thompson spoke into his radio. "We have a friendly casualty requiring immediate medical evacuation. Be advised, hostile forces are approaching the landing zone." The helicopter pilot's response was immediate and professional. "Copy Falcon 6, we're prepared for hot extraction." Marking LZ with smoke in 30 seconds. Maria tried to help as Williams worked on her wounds, but her strength was fading rapidly. The combination of blood loss, dehydration, and exhaustion was taking its toll. She could hear gunfire beginning in the distance as the SEAL team engaged the approaching insurgents. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," Williams encouraged as he worked to stabilize her condition. "We've got you now and we're going to get you home." The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the eastern ridge as Park and Chen began engaging the insurgent forces. The distinctive crack of high-powered rifles mixed with the chatter of enemy AK-47s as the firefight intensified. Thompson coordinated the tactical situation while helping Williams prepare Maria for extraction. Purple smoke began billowing from the landing zone as the helicopter approached. and the rotor wash created a swirling dust storm that reduced visibility. Hostile forces are attempting to flank our position from the north, Chen reported over the radio. We need to move to the extraction point immediately. Williams finished applying a pressure bandage to Maria's leg and prepared to carry her to the helicopter. She was conscious but weak, and her skin had taken on a pale color that indicated severe blood loss. Can you walk at all? Williams asked her. I'll try, Maria replied, though her voice was barely audible over the noise of the approaching helicopter and ongoing gunfire. Thompson made the decision to carry her himself, knowing that Williams would be more effective providing security during their movement to the landing zone. He lifted Maria carefully, feeling how light she had become due to her injuries and dehydration. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, and the crew chief immediately began laying down suppressive fire toward the insurgent positions. The extraction was going to be conducted under fire with a critically injured casualty, who might not survive the flight to medical facilities. As Thompson carried Maria toward the helicopter, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I put you all in danger. Thompson realized that his team's initial instinct to treat her as a threat had been wrong, and that mistake had almost cost the life of a fellow American soldier who had already sacrificed so much for her country. The helicopter's rotors created a deafening noise as Thompson carried Maria toward the aircraft. Bullets whistled overhead as the insurgents closed in on their position, and the crew chief's machine gun provided continuous suppressive fire to keep the enemy at bay. Move, 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 the pilot shouted over the radio as his aircraft took sporadic small arms fire from multiple directions. Williams provided rear security as Thompson loaded Maria into the helicopter, where a Navy corpsman immediately began advanced medical treatment. The corpsman's face was grim as he assessed her condition and began working to stabilize her vital signs. She's lost a lot of blood, the corpsman shouted over the noise. Blood pressure is dropping and she's going into hypovolemic shock. We need to get her to a trauma center immediately. Park and Chen began their movement to the extraction point, laying down covering fire as they bounded back from their overwatch positions. The insurgents had gotten closer than anticipated, and the SEAL team was now fighting a running gun battle to reach safety. Thompson felt the weight of his earlier decision as he watched the medical team work on Maria. His team had spent precious minutes debating whether to trust her, time that could have been used to get her the medical attention she desperately needed. Those minutes might have made the difference between life and death. All personnel aboard, Williams reported as he dove into the helicopter with Chen and Park close behind him. The pilot immediately began lifting off as enemy fire intensified around the landing zone. Tracer rounds lit up the darkening sky, and Thompson could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions as more insurgents joined the fight. During the flight to the medical facility, Thompson sat beside Maria as the corpsman continued his emergency treatment. She was drifting in and out of consciousness, but when her eyes were open, they were filled with gratitude for the rescue. Thank you, she whispered during one of her lucid moments. Thank you for not leaving me. Thompson felt a knot form in his stomach as he realized how close they had come to doing exactly that. His training and experience had told him to treat her as a threat, and he had almost followed those instincts to a tragic conclusion. The helicopter touched down at the forward surgical team's facility, and Maria was immediately wheeled into surgery. Thompson and his team were debriefed by intelligence officers who were interested in the insurgent activity they had observed and engaged. During the debriefing, Thompson learned more about Maria's story. She had indeed been injured in an IED blast 3 days earlier, and her patrol had been scattered by the attack. 2 of her fellow soldiers had been killed in the explosion, and she had been presumed dead when no trace of her could be found at the blast site. She walked over 15 miles through hostile territory with those injuries, the intelligence officer explained. Her determination to survive and return to friendly forces probably saved important intelligence about insurgent movements in that area. The information made Thompson feel even worse about his team's initial reaction to her approach. A genuine American hero had been fighting for her life and trying to reach safety, while they had been preparing to kill her based on tactical paranoia and worst-case scenario thinking. Over the following days, as Maria underwent multiple surgeries to repair her injuries, Thompson visited her in the hospital whenever his duties allowed. He felt compelled to apologize for the delay in helping her, even though she insisted that he and his team had saved her life. "You made the right decision based on the information you had," Maria told him during one of his visits. "In that environment, you can't afford to take unnecessary risks with your team's safety." But Thompson knew that her forgiveness didn't absolve him of the moral weight of what had almost happened. His team had been seconds away from killing an innocent American soldier who was desperately seeking help from her own forces. The incident forced Thompson to examine his own assumptions about combat decision-making. His training had prepared him to make split-second choices based on limited information, but it hadn't adequately prepared him for the psychological aftermath of nearly making a catastrophic mistake. Williams and the other team members were also struggling with the implications of their actions. They had been prepared to follow Thompson's orders to engage what they believed was a threat, and they too had to confront the reality that their caution had almost resulted in tragedy. "We did everything by the book," Williams said during one of their informal discussions about the incident, "but sometimes the book doesn't account for the human cost of our decisions." Park, who had maintained her scope on Maria throughout the entire encounter, was particularly affected by the near miss. As the team's sniper, she would have been responsible for taking the shot if Thompson had given the order to engage. "I could see her face clearly through my scope," Park confided to Thompson. "There was no hostility there, just fear and desperation. I should have recognized that she wasn't a threat." Chen pointed out that their standard operating procedures existed for good reasons, and that second-guessing every decision could be just as dangerous as being too trigger-happy. The balance between appropriate caution and unnecessary paranoia was a fine line that every special operations team had to walk. The psychological impact of the incident extended beyond Thompson's immediate team. Word of the near miss spread through the special operations community, sparking discussions about rules of engagement, threat assessment, and the challenges of distinguishing between friend and foe in modern warfare. Maria's recovery was slow but steady. The damage to her leg required multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy, but doctors were confident that she would eventually regain full mobility. More importantly to Thompson, she survived the ordeal and would be able to return home to her family. During their final conversation before Thompson's team rotated back to the United States, Maria shared something that would stay with him forever. She had known that the soldiers ahead were debating whether to trust her, and she had been prepared to accept whatever decision they made. "I understood why you hesitated," she told him. "In your position, I probably would have made the same choice. The important thing is that when it mattered most, you chose to help rather than hurt." Thompson realized that Maria's forgiveness was more generous than he deserved, but it also helped him understand that the moral complexity of combat situations didn't always have clear right and wrong answers. Sometimes good people had to make difficult decisions with incomplete information and live with the consequences. 6 months after the incident, Thompson found himself back in the United States, but the memory of that day in Afghanistan continued to haunt him. He had completed his deployment and was now stationed at Naval Special Warfare Command in San Diego, where he was responsible for training the next generation of SEAL operators. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now teaching young sailors about threat assessment and rules of engagement, topics that had become deeply personal rather than merely academic. Every time he discussed scenario-based decision-making, he thought about Maria and how close his team had come to making an irreversible mistake. During one particular training session, a young petty officer asked about the challenges of identifying friendly forces in hostile environments. Thompson paused before answering, knowing that his response would be informed by painful personal experience rather than textbook knowledge. "The hardest part," Thompson began, "isn't recognizing obvious threats or clear friendlies. It's those situations where you have limited information and have to make a decision that could affect lives. Sometimes the right choice isn't immediately obvious." He went on to describe a hypothetical scenario that was remarkably similar to his encounter with Maria. Though he didn't reveal the personal nature of the example, the young sailors listened intently as he explained the various factors that had to be considered when evaluating potential threats. Meanwhile, across the country at Walter Reed Medical Center, Maria was undergoing her final round of physical therapy. The damage to her leg had healed better than doctors had initially expected, and she was preparing to return to active duty. However, the psychological impact of her ordeal had proven more challenging to overcome than the physical injuries. Maria had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, not just from the IED blast that had injured her, but from the entire experience of being alone in hostile territory and then nearly being killed by her own forces. The knowledge that American soldiers had almost shot her had shaken her faith in the Brotherhood of Arms that was supposed to protect all service members. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had been working with her to process the complex emotions surrounding the incident. During one session, Maria expressed her struggle to reconcile her gratitude for being rescued with her anger at being viewed as a threat by fellow Americans. "I understand why they hesitated," Maria told Dr. Mitchell. "Intellectually, I know they were following proper procedures, but emotionally, it's hard to accept that people wearing the same uniform as me were prepared to kill me." Dr. Mitchell helped Maria understand that her mixed emotions were entirely normal and that processing trauma often involved working through seemingly contradictory feelings. The fact that she could acknowledge both sides of the situation was actually a sign of psychological health rather than confusion. Back in San Diego, Thompson had been struggling with his own psychological aftermath from the incident. He had requested to speak with a military counselor about the stress of command decisions and the weight of responsibility that came with leading special operations teams. During his counseling sessions, Thompson discovered that many combat leaders struggled with similar issues. The military's emphasis on decisive action and confidence often made it difficult for commanders to acknowledge doubt or regret about their decisions, even when those feelings were entirely justified. His counselor, Major Patricia Reynolds, helped him understand that his willingness to question his actions was actually a strength rather than a weakness. Leaders who never doubted their decisions were often more dangerous than those who carefully considered the moral implications of their choices. The fact that you're troubled by what almost happened shows that you have the moral compass necessary for command, Major Reynolds told him. "The leaders I worry about are the ones who never lose sleep over their decisions." 3 months later, Thompson received unexpected news. Maria had requested to meet with him during her transition back to active duty. She was being assigned to a new unit and would be passing through San Diego as part of her redeployment process. The meeting was arranged through official channels, and Thompson found himself nervously preparing for a conversation he had both hoped for and dreaded. He wasn't sure what Maria wanted to discuss, but he knew that this encounter might provide closure for both of them. When they met at a coffee shop near the base, Thompson was struck by how different Maria looked from the injured, desperate soldier he had carried to the helicopter. She was healthy, confident, and wearing the dress blue uniform of her new rank. She had been promoted to Sergeant First Class in recognition of her courage and determination during the incident. "Chief Thompson," she said, extending her hand with a smile, "it's good to see you again under better circumstances." Thompson shook her hand, noting the firm grip and steady eye contact that spoke to her recovery and resilience. "Sergeant Rodriguez, you look like you're doing well. I'm glad to see you've recovered from your injuries." They spent the next 2 hours talking about their respective experiences since the incident. Maria described her physical therapy and psychological counseling, while Thompson shared his struggles with command responsibility and decision-making under pressure. "I want you to know something," Maria said toward the end of their conversation. "What happened that day has made me a better soldier. Not just because I survived, but because I learned something important about the complexity of combat situations." She went on to explain that her experience had given her a unique perspective on the challenges faced by special operations teams. She had been able to share that insight with other soldiers during her recovery, helping them understand the difficulty of making split-second decisions with limited information. "I've been speaking to groups about the incident," Maria continued, "not to criticize what you did, but to help people understand that good soldiers can find themselves in impossible situations where there are no perfect choices." Thompson felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he realized that Maria had found a way to turn their shared trauma into something positive. Her ability to forgive and find meaning in the experience was more healing than any counseling session he had attended. Before they parted ways, Maria had one final message for Thompson. "I want you to continue training those young sailors," she said, "but make sure they understand that being cautious isn't the same as being heartless. Sometimes taking a risk to help someone is the right choice, even when the procedures say otherwise." Thompson promised her that he would carry that message forward in his training responsibilities. He realized that Maria's perspective would make him a better instructor and leader, helping him prepare the next generation of special operators for the moral complexities they would face in combat. 2 years after their reunion in San Diego, both Thompson and Maria had transformed their shared experience into something that would benefit countless other service members. Their paths had diverged geographically but remained connected by the lessons they continued to learn from that fateful day in Afghanistan. Thompson had been promoted to Senior Chief Petty Officer and was now the lead instructor for advanced combat decision-making at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. His course had become one of the most respected programs in the special operations community, largely because of his willingness to address the psychological and moral complexities of combat leadership. The curriculum he developed included detailed case studies based on real-world scenarios, including a carefully anonymized version of his encounter with Maria. Students were required to work through the decision-making process, considering not just tactical factors but also the human cost of their choices. Leadership isn't just about making the tactically correct decision, Thompson would tell his students. It's about understanding that every choice you make affects real people with families, dreams, and hopes for the future. His teaching style had evolved to emphasize empathy alongside tactical proficiency. He encouraged students to consider the perspectives of all parties involved in any given situation, from their own team members to potential civilians and even enemy forces. One of Thompson's most effective teaching tools was a simulation exercise that placed students in scenarios where they had to make rapid decisions with incomplete information. The exercise was designed to be psychologically stressful, replicating the pressure of real combat situations while allowing for discussion and reflection afterward. During these exercises, Thompson would often observe students making the same assumptions and following the same thought processes that he had experienced during his encounter with Maria. This gave him the opportunity to guide them toward more nuanced thinking about threat, assessment, and humanitarian responsibilities. Meanwhile, Maria had found her calling as a military liaison working with veteran support organizations. Her unique perspective as someone who had been both helped and nearly harmed by military decision-making made her an effective advocate for service members, dealing with the psychological aftermath of combat. She had completed a master's degree in counseling, psychology, and was working toward becoming a licensed therapist specializing in military trauma. Her personal experience with PTSD had given her credibility with other veterans who might otherwise be reluctant to seek help. Maria's speaking engagements had evolved into a formal program where she visited military bases to discuss the importance of mental health resources and the complexity of combat stress. Her presentations always included the story of her rescue, though she was careful to frame it as an example of how good people could find themselves in difficult situations. The soldiers who rescued me weren't villains for hesitating to trust me, she would tell her audiences. They were professionals doing their job in an environment where mistakes could cost lives. The important thing is that when they had to choose between caution and compassion, they chose compassion. Her work had led to improvements in military protocols for handling potential friendly casualties in hostile environments. The lessons learned from her case had been incorporated into training programs across all branches of service, potentially preventing similar near-miss incidents in the future. Both Thompson and Maria had been invited to participate in a joint conference on combat ethics and decision-making. The event brought together military leaders, ethicists, and mental health professionals to discuss the challenges of maintaining humanity in warfare. Their presentation was the highlight of the conference. As they shared their story from both perspectives, for the first time publicly, the audience of senior military officers and civilian experts was deeply moved by their honest discussion of the incident and its aftermath. "This isn't a story about heroes and villains," Thompson told the audience. "It's a story about the complexity of human nature and the difficulty of making moral choices under extreme pressure." Maria added, "The real lesson isn't that we should always take risks to help others, or that we should always be cautious to protect our teams. The lesson is that we need to acknowledge the weight of these decisions and provide support for the people who have to make them." Their joint presentation led to the development of new training protocols that emphasized the psychological Preparation for moral decision-making in combat. Military psychologists began working more closely with tactical trainers to ensure that service members were prepared for the emotional aftermath of their choices, not just the immediate tactical consequences. The conference also resulted in improved support systems for service members who had experienced moral injury from combat decisions. Many attendees realized that the military had been better at preparing people to handle physical wounds than psychological ones, and that needed to change. In the years that followed, Thompson and Maria maintained a professional relationship that evolved into a genuine friendship. They occasionally collaborated on research projects and training initiatives, always working to improve the way the military prepared its people for the moral complexities of modern warfare. Their story became a case study taught in military academies, war colleges, and ethics courses around the world. It was used not to criticize military decision-making, but to illustrate the importance of considering multiple perspectives and preparing leaders for the psychological weight of command. Thompson eventually retired from active duty and joined Maria in civilian work supporting veterans. Together, they established a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping military leaders process the moral complexities of their combat experiences and develop healthier approaches to decision-making under pressure. The organization's motto, inspired by their shared experience, was simple. Courage is not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act with compassion despite uncertainty. Looking back on that day in Afghanistan, both Thompson and Maria realized that their near-tragic encounter had ultimately led to positive changes that would benefit thousands of other service members. Their willingness to confront the difficult emotions surrounding the incident had transformed personal trauma into a force for institutional improvement. The injured female soldier who had strolled by that day had indeed caused the SEAL team to regret their initial actions, but that regret had been channeled into growth, learning, and a commitment to ensuring that future military leaders would be better prepared to balance tactical necessity with human compassion. In the end, their story became proof that even our mistakes can become sources of wisdom if we have the courage to learn from them.